Hello, so today I'm going to be talking about something that people often don't realise in regard to their mental health and their anxiety. And that's some hidden signs of anxiety that people often mistake for their personality traits. So if you've ever been told that you overthink everything, or that you care too much, or maybe people describe you as sensitive, intense, a perfectionist, or even someone who struggles to relax. Some of those things you think are just part of your personality are actually signs that your nervous system has been under stress for a long time. So, my name's Rick Cardwell. I'm a psychodynamic therapist and a counsellor. And as a therapist, I see this constantly, weekly, if not daily sometimes, in that people feel they have faults in their personality and it's part of who they are. People often come into therapy believing there's something fundamentally wrong with who they are. But many of the behaviours they've developed are actually protective responses. They're actually survival strategies. And today I want to talk about some of the most common anxiety behaviours people mistake for personality traits. Because understanding yourself differently can completely change the way that you relate to yourself. And if you stay with me until the end, I'll also explain why these patterns are so hard to stop, even when you know that they're exhausting you. So let's start with overthinking. A lot of people think overthinking means they're intelligent, analytical, or detail orientated, and sometimes they are. But chronic overthinking is often the nervous system trying to prevent danger. Your brain starts believing, if I think hard enough, maybe I can stop the bad things from happening. So you replay conversations, you analyse text messages, you worry about how you come across, and you imagine worst case scenarios. And eventually, your brain gets stuck in a loop where thinking feels like safety. But the problem is this: overthinking doesn't actually create certainty, it creates exhaustion. And many people with anxiety become mentally tired long before they get physically tired. And often I tell this to clients. Overthinking is not a sign that your brain is broken, it's a sign your brain has learned that vigilance feels necessary. And that's a very different thing. Now, another really common one is people pleasing. I have done videos on people pleasing before. I'm just going to summarise it for this video. Many people describe themselves as too nice, but often what's underneath that is anxiety. Because if your nervous system's learned that conflict feels unsafe, you may become highly focused on keeping other people comfortable. You apologise constantly, you avoid saying no, you worry about disappointing people, and you over explain yourself. You actually feel guilty for having needs. And eventually, you become so focused on managing everyone else's emotions that you lose touch with your own. Now, what's important to understand is that people pleasing isn't weakness. It's often a protective adaptation. Your nervous system may have learned, if people are happy with me, I feel safe. And that's why people pleasing can feel almost automatic, even when it's hurting you, even when you know you're burning out. And this is one of the reasons anxiety can be so invisible. Because from the outside, people often praise these behaviours. They call you dependable and kind, easygoing, but internally you feel exhausted all of the time. Now, another sign of chronic stress and anxiety is, and it's a bit obvious to say, but struggling to relax. This is something a lot of people really do misunderstand. Some people feel physically uncontrollable when they finally stop. They sit down to rest and suddenly feel restless, guilty, anxious, or overwhelmed. Well, why? Because when your nervous system gets used to constant stimulation, productivity, pressure, or survival mode, stillness can start to feel unfamiliar. And the brain often interprets unfamiliarity as danger. So instead of relaxing, your mind speeds up. You suddenly remember everything you need to do, you feel guilty for resting, and you tell yourself you should be doing something more productive. And this is why many anxious people say things like, I don't know how to switch off. And what's really important here is understanding that healing is not just about removing stress. It's about teaching the nervous system that safety exists outside of constant doing. Now, that can take time, especially if you've lived in survival mode for many years. Another really common anxiety behaviour is reassurance seeking. So this can look like asking people repeatedly if they're upset with you, checking if everything is okay, Googling symptoms constantly, needing certainty before making decisions, wanting guarantees that nothing bad will happen, and reassurance works temporarily. That's why people keep repeating it, they keep doing it over again and again. It lowers anxiety in the short term, but unfortunately, it also teaches the brain that this fear must be important, otherwise, why would we keep checking? So the cycle continues. And this is one of the biggest misunderstandings about anxiety. Most anxious behaviours are actually attempts to feel safe. And those behaviours can be avoidance, overthinking, checking, controlling, or reassurance. The nervous system is constantly trying to reduce uncertainty. But the more we try to eliminate uncertainty completely, the more anxious we often become. Now, one of the saddest things I hear as a therapist is people describing themselves as too emotional, too sensitive, too needy, or too much. But often, what I actually see is someone whose nervous system has been overloaded for a very long time. Someone who became hyper aware, hyper vigilant, emotionally exhausted. And when people live with chronic stress or anxiety for long enough, they often stop seeing these responses as stress responses. They start to believe that this is just who I am. But healing often begins when we stop judging the coping strategy and start understanding why it developed. That doesn't mean staying stuck. It means approaching yourself with understanding instead of shame, because shame rarely helps people heal. Understanding does. So if you recognise yourself in any of these patterns, you're definitely not alone. These are some of the most common anxiety responses I deal with as a therapist every single day. And the most important thing is this: these behaviours make sense. They developed for a reason. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about the physical symptoms of anxiety that people often mistake for illness, burnout, or personal weaknesses. So if this video has resonated with you, let me know in the comments which patterns you relate to most. Sometimes naming these experiences is the first step towards changing them. So thank you for watching. I'm going to make this a series of 3 videos. I'll release 3 this week. This was the first one of those 3. So I'll look forward to seeing you in the second video.